So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we are at WBC 2022, and we're sat down with Bryan Collars.
Good morning.
Who is designed...
Afternoon.
He's designed Crown and Crescent, which is a new game on part of the American Revolutionary War, I believe.
Yes, it is.
And this is coming up from MMP later. So we're very grateful for you sitting down with us, spend some time kind of going through this game of yours.
Sure, my pleasure.
And just hand it over to you. Let's introduce yourself first.
Okay.
Who are you? What we doing?
My name is Bryan Collars. I don't even know what to say about myself. I'm an archivist from the state of South Carolina, and been playing games most of my life. I picked up my first game when I was in 7th grade, when I picked up a copy of Panzer Blitz at a yard sale for $1.
Changed your life forever.
It changed my life forever. It took me a year to figure out how to play it, because I was, it was such a invigorating thing to be. I was always a history buff, even at that young age. But that box cover just sort of grips you, and it was one of the best box covers I've ever seen. It stuck with me, and I still have that game on my game shelf right now.
So what is it that led you to want to design your own board game?
Well, actually, I've designed 2 board games, this being my second. The first one, of course, was WBC, the board game.
Yeah.
Which was an effort on my part to create a game that recreates the experience of WBC, and it was mildly successful, but it never made publication. But the mechanics behind it are rock solid, and it's actually led me on to something else with that. But this particular game was generated, the genesis for originated out of a desire to recreate the Angola system, or at least use the mechanics in the Angolan system by the Ragnar brothers, because I love that game and we played it a lot. Mm-hmm. And we felt that it needed another treatment in some other fashion, and so MMP sort of didn't ask me, but said, if you're going to do something, let us know about it. So I started thinking about it, and my first attempt was a Sicily game from World War II. That's a swirling 3, German, Italian, British, and Americans in Sicily. But after about 6 months of working my first play test, it just wouldn't work.
Okay.
It never coalesced or anything like that. So I was visiting a friend in Beaufort, South Carolina, and we were playing war games. And on the drive down there, I passed several Revolutionary War sites. And I got to thinking, and we were talking about my failed attempt at Sicily, and it snapped in my head that the revolution in South Carolina was really a swirling 4-part nature. You had the British coming down in 1779 to relieve the siege of Savannah. You had the Continental Army reinforcing from the other, the northern colonies. And then you had the native South Carolinians who fought for either the loyalist or the rebel side. And so you had this clearly defined four factions that could combat each other, of which 2 of them were allied with each other, and the other 2 were allied in opposition, and that fits perfectly in the Angola system to start with. And so in a matter of 3 days, the entire system coalesced in my brain how to make it work, and the base game came out of that. 2 weeks after I thought about it, I called Bryan Yausch at MMP and said, I've got this idea, and he loved it. And the first play test, it worked rock solid. So, in essence, you want to talk about the game?
Yeah. So for anyone who hasn't played the Angola game, what can we expect from this as a 4-player experience?
Okay. Angola. The heart of the Angola system is essentially you pre-plan your turn with cards that activate the units on the board. So you have a series of cards that will activate certain units or certain brigades or whatever you want. Your units or your main maneuver elements essentially on the board, and they'll be activated based upon the way you lay your cards out. The trick of the heart of the Angola system is once you lay them down, you can't touch them again. So it sort of creates this fog of war, because what did I lay next? Especially on a long turn. Did I play this card? Did I not play this card? What's coming? Further compounded by the fact that you have no idea who's actually going to start the turn, because it's determined randomly. So you may think that I got to go first, but you're going to go last or something like that. So, and it's probably the best system I've ever encountered that recreates the fog of war and no contact, no plan survives contact with the enemy, because you really can't tell, because the situation changes so rapidly on the board that what you plan to do with one maneuver element may not be available to you by the time that maneuver element has been activated. And so that particular aspect of the Angola system is recreated here, and then further compounded by, or further augmented, I should say, by we have where's the deck at? Right here, I believe. Yeah, so there's an event deck that comes in each turn that brings other random elements, reinforcements, and events and such, but you don't get to play those immediately. In the Angola game, in the Angola system, or at least in Angola, those things come in automatically, and the way I've constructed here, they get phased into your deck, so you have to not only plan for them, so there's a slight delay before you get your reinforcements, as they're not automatic. So it's good. So historically, over 260 battles, skirmishes, and actions were fought in the state of South Carolina, more than any other colony during the Revolution, which is a little known fact. Most people know Camden and Kings Mountain and Cowpens. Yeah, exactly. And then the siege of Charleston and whatnot. But there's many more. So each of the spaces on the map are actually places where battles or skirmishes or actions were fought. Now, actions is being loosely termed. It could be as many as 5 or 10 men per side, but they're definitely recorded, and people actually fought each other. Many times it was brother or family against family, et cetera, et cetera. So that sort of is the genesis for that. And then historically, in 1768, the Crown decided to divide the state into 7 judicial districts. So they're represented in the map, which conveniently makes easy things to tie into victory points. Control of a district gains you a victory point, and then it's a competition between who can control as many districts as they can in each turn, and then based upon that, the victory point chart will go up or down based on how you so it's a zero-sum thing. So if you get 3 victory points in one turn, I may get 2 victory points the next turn, and it drops back down to 1. So at the end of 8 turns, essentially, it's where the victory point marker is on.
Is there a sudden death victory if someone controls maybe 4 districts or 5
districts?
Yeah, there
is. If you can control it at a certain point in time, like on turn 8 or turn 6 or 7, if you control 5 of the 7 districts, it's over. Yeah, exactly. So so in each district there'll be a certain number of spaces that exist, generally between 6 and 8. I think one has 8, one has 6, and the rest of them have 7. And each district is composed of 3 different types. You have hexagonal fortified spaces, which are fortified towns. Each district has one purely for gameplay. You have circle spaces, which represent like not towns, but geographic areas and points of interest where something happened. And then you have square spaces, which are towns but not fortified. And these are administrative centers that you take reinforcements and things that. The units in the game are comprised of, the counters, I should say, are comprised of 2 types. There's units, and then there are auxiliaries. Units consist of your formations of infantry, essentially at the regimental level in the Revolution, which could be anywhere from 75 to 250 men, maybe a little more, but generally falls within that range. And they're represented on the map by the large numerals representing straight points. Each counter has a number of steps. If there's obviously the first step is the front side, and if you flip it over, if it's blank on the back side, that means a 1-step unit. It takes a step loss, it's eliminated. Regular units will have right. There's a good one. Yeah, and then the regulars are comprised of much larger strength, typically a higher strength value with a graphics or a counter look on the back, so when you take a step loss there. So they're 2-step units. I mean, it's pretty standard stuff, to be honest with you. And then there are what we call auxiliaries, or these are things that augment the troops. Light companies, Cornwallis, when he came south, stripped all the light companies out of his regiments and formed them into their own unit. And they fought as skirmishers in front of the the main body, or would fall back and actually form a unit to fight in the line. There's cavalry, and there's two types of cavalry represented in the game: a light cavalry or militia cavalry that would rise up, and then dragoons, which represent the Continental Dragoons or the British Dragoons that were here, 17th Light Dragoons, or the British Legion in this instance. So there's two types of those. Not too much distinction between the two, other than the fact that dragoons can pursue after combat, so they create an extra step loss if you win, and dragoons are on the winning side as they run down the defeated enemy. And there's artillery, represented by a number of pips on the dice. You just in combat, you roll dice, and in 5 or 6 they'll disrupt or kill somebody. The British have masked grenadiers, which help them in assaults, and I believe that's it. Cavalry, light troop, and these units, because they're auxiliaries, they can't exist in a force by themselves. They have to be assigned to a brigade that has a unit. So it's sort of a 1-to-1 ratio for administrative purposes, and you can never put more than one type of one unit in a stack, so they don't get bloated. And one of the things that Angola it doesn't have that limitation, so you have these huge stacks of counters that have numerous pluses. So I try to eliminate that because that didn't really feel appropriate to the era. So they're generally die roll modifier counters, and so the unique system about when the combat system in Angola is sort of there's no CRT. Basically, is you figure out what your odds are, and there's a chart right here. So everything you can practically play the game with just the map. Once you learn
it's all on it.
It's all on it. So once you learn the system, you can refer to it. But a lot of times,
and so you just have the odds, and that's what happens.
Well, sort of.
Okay.
Yes. I'll try and explain it, and it may hopefully it'll make sense. So the first thing you do in determining combat is you determine the initial odds. And then you'll roll if there's artillery represented in the battle. You'll roll to see what that effect is, and that may change the odds as you disrupt or kill an opposing unit. Then you make a determination if you want your light units, your light auxiliaries, to either form a skirmish line or just fight with the main body. Depending upon what choice you're making, you either have a die roll modifier or an extra die in combat. Then you roll to determine if your units are well-ordered and formed line, which is an issue that a lot of colonial troops had problems with. So that's reflected, and apply leader effects and blah, blah, blah. And then you'll come to a final determination on what the odds are with the plus or minus. And what you'll do is you'll roll a number of dice that are determined by the die roll matrix. I'm real inventive there, a die roll matrix. Basically, each player starts with a base of 1, and then depending upon the circumstances, you may get an additional die. Typically, the attacker's rolling 2 dice and the defender's rolling 3. That's just about where the average comes in. Sometimes it's 1 and 2, or 1 and 3, or 1 and 4, et cetera, or 2 and 4. Then you roll your dice, and you add your die roll modifier in, and then you check the highest single die roll. It's not a cumulative thing, it's just your highest single die roll plus your modifiers, and then you look at the differential between what the defender rolled and what the attacker rolled, and that will result in an odd shift, and that's how you determine. So what that basically represents is that your raw strength is not always going to determine who's the victor in a battle. Sometimes tactics or the auxiliaries you have will shift the results in a battle, so that the strongest doesn't always win. There's occasions a 1 to 6 result. The attacker rolls a 1 on a die, and the defender rolls a 6. Is even at 3 to 1, odds is going to shift down into the defender's favor because of the odds differential or the die roll differential. So it sort of provides that uncertainty, but typically the units with more strength are going to win because they start higher on the odds table, but that's not always the case. So it's really, really, really cool. And
now it's a point-to-point movement, so there are things like interception.
Yes.
So armies can avoid, or you can intercept someone moving by.
We do not have evasion in this at the moment. We're still currently in play testing, but we definitely have interception, so you just can't do an end run around you and stuff like that. And so there's interception. That's one of the things that cavalry does for you. It augments your interception. Yeah, and like most point-to-point systems, it's a base 9. Roll 2d6 and get a 9 with your modifiers to intercept. It's very very conventional. If you've ever done a point-to-point game, you're going to recognize a lot of the features here. You know, a connection path to inner space. The white line is 1. The dotted black line is like a wilderness path, and it costs 2, and it provides some defensive bonuses if you fight a battle with an enemy that's crossed the wilderness space. We have a reinforcement and replacement track, and that's where you each turn you get 2 points, and then there are certain cards that will bring in additional replacement points. And then to offset dispersal and regroup, you know, when you fought a battle in this period, not everybody died or became casualties tended to melt into the wilderness and then would coalesce. And because the turns are done by season, spring, summer, fall, winter, it gives you the opportunity to regroup those units. So we have a mechanism to where you can, just because you took a step loss on it's like for every third step loss you get a loyalist or militia back, and every fourth you get a regular strength point back to represent, you know, reinforcing units and things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting game. I mean, it really is really rock solid. And if you're at all interested in the period, it's a swirling sort of nature because the nature of the combat or the nature of the conflict at this time, you had areas of the state that the British thought they'd pacified rise up in rebellion just because, you know, there's a British leader represented the game by the name of it was Major Wymas, and Cornwallis actually sent him to the PD in Georgetown to pacify the region, even though they weren't in rebellion. He went up there, and he managed to drive all the way up to Chirac Courthouse, burning plantations and stuff willy-nilly.
That doesn't make friends, right?
Does not make friends. In fact, it had the opposite effect. They rose up in rebellion to him, but one of his effects in the game is he disrupts units prior to combat because he's creating terror, but in return, the Continentals and the Whigs get additional resources at the end of the turn. So that's a game basically in a nutshell. I mean, it would be.
Well, and it's cool to have a game that's focused on a period of the Revolutionary War that I don't know if there's a ton of games out there that focus
just on
that way. So I'm very interested from that perspective because, you know, we've played some of the bigger, you know, grander games that cover the whole thing. And then South Carolina is like just a part of that. Right. And I love focusing in on smaller parts of that to see some of the detail that's in there. And these are, you know, the places that you can go and visit when you're on vacation there as well. And I think that's such a neat part of this game. And I liked what you'd said earlier. You can pretty much play this from the map. When you were describing the combat sequence, all of those charts are in sequence, and I could see exactly what I needed to do with just what you said. Yeah, and I think that's a huge boon to players. That's very neat.
It makes the game playable,
right? I think a lot of times we're diving into rule books. This is very playable because it's almost all here.
It's almost all here. You should hardly ever have to refer to the rule book once you become familiar with the system. In fact, you probably don't even need to consult the charts. Once you
we do that after 2-3 rounds of combat. Sometimes you're like, okay, I know this, and this, and
so it's very fluid and very intuitive. I mean, once you, like I said, it's just once you get it, you get it, and it's a really interesting system to learn. I can't say enough about Angola, how wonderful it is. It's probably one of the finest war games I've ever played, purely from the standpoint.
This is coming from Multi-Man Publishing. When can people expect this to kind of be available to them?
Right now.
Right now.
I mean, you can pre-order it now.
Right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up for pre-order. I suspect that once it reaches a pre-order limit, I think we're hopeful it'll be next year for publication.
Yeah.
Early to mid next year if we can get the pre-orders up.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sitting down, spending some time with us, and showing us how this goes. Looks very exciting, and hopefully that's everyone else is just as excited as we are to come and get this in. So thank you very much for sitting down with us.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you all tuning in. I've been Alexander for thePlayersaid.com.
I'm Grant.